Now, of course, you may think we've covered absolutely every single topic related to this issue, but there's plenty more still to come. So I'll introduce each of the speakers here, and then I've got a number of questions, and I hope you will as well. So I want to start off with Tim O'Reilly. So like John Battelle, Tim has been doing an event called Next Economy, focused on a variety of issues related to the future of work, and he's been writing extensively. I hope you've seen some of his very cogent posts recently. So but Tim, you've got the dais. So.
All right. So let me start by saying that Paul Sappho actually said a lot of what I was going to say. But I just want
my best ideas from Tim.
Yeah, but I just want to point out that in Peter's description of the largest companies, what was the measure by which they were described as the largest?
Market cap.
Market cap. That tells you everything you need to know about our economy. We are measuring it based on stock price. And we have built an economy in which that is what everybody is told to optimize for. Effectively, when we say technology is taking away jobs, we've got it wrong. Technology does whatever we tell it to do. And we are telling it, optimize for stock price. If we want to have a market that's optimized for people, we have to start telling the market, optimize for people. And so the real question that's the thing that I've learned in the last year of thinking about this and writing the book that I've just finished called WTF, What's the Future and Why It's Up to Us. Because I think there are choices that we have to make. And those choices have to be backed up by thinking through what are the policy interventions that make a difference. And I do think that the previous group of panelists were absolutely right. We're thinking too small. We're thinking way too small. Because we do have an immense opportunity before us. We also have immense challenges. And just rearranging things a little bit is not going to be good enough. And that being said, there are a lot of small things that we can and should do. So when I think about the next couple of years, for me, the biggest priority is to change the narrative. When Paul talked about the rise of shareholder value, that was an idea that was planted, that was nurtured, and that grew, and that took over the thinking of policymakers, that took over the thinking of CEOs. We're now at a tipping point where that thinking is being questioned. And there is an opportunity to replace it with fresh thinking. Unfortunately, many people who are on the progressive side simply say, oh, well, we just have to go back to the old thinking. And I don't think that's right either. So we have to think forward. So I want to bring it round to this independent worker angle, which is really the subject of our meeting tonight. And the thing I've been thinking about is that there really are, there's something new in the world of independent work, and that is platforms. Because in the old days, an independent worker really was truly independent. But today, independent workers are doing their work increasingly through network platforms. And it's very obvious. You see that in the case of Uber and Lyft or Airbnb, or TaskRabbit or any of the other sort of on-demand platforms. By the way, I've heard, for example, that Amazon Flex expects to be bigger than Lyft within the year. So there's a lot of action in that area. But there are also platforms like YouTube and Facebook. People who are making their living off of those. There are platforms like Google, which sends traffic and either sends it to other people or sends it to itself. And one of the big questions is the allocation of value between platforms and the people who work for them. And the question that we have to ask, first of all, is this big question about financialization of the economy so that Uber, for example, will say, oh, we have to optimize for this valuation that we have to grow into. You know, people are valuing us at $60 billion, and we're only going to get there if we can take over the world and become super profitable, and that's how we'll, you know, win that stock price. But there is a different allocation, and one in which we can start to ask ourselves, how do we benefit? How do we measure the benefit to all of the participants in the ecosystem? And we've kind of talked about that in the last panel, but I really think it begins with a new set of metrics and a new set of conversations about what we measure and what we think about in the economy of the future.
That's great. Thanks. So next I want to pass the mic to Kristen Sharp. So Kristen's former Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Mark Warner, one of the smartest people on this topic I know of, and has led the Shift Commission with New America Foundation. Take it away.
Thank you. So I run the Shift Commission on Work, Workers, and Technology, which is a joint project of New America, a think tank in Washington, D.C., and Bloomberg. And it was formed a year ago or so in order to examine the ways that automation, artificial intelligence, and digital platforms are changing the world of work. And we did this in something of an unusual way, which was going to cities around the country and bringing together a diverse group of people from the technology world, the traditional business world, the cultural worlds, policy-making worlds, in order to do economic scenario planning. Basically, sort of future planning where you imagine what you think the world that you would like to see happen 20 years from now or 10 years from now looks like, or the world that you think is sort of most likely to happen. And we did this based around examining two key questions. One, do we think that we'll have more or less work as a result of technology and automation in the future? And two, do we think that work will be a traditional structure, a 9-to-5 job where you have defined responsibilities and salary, et cetera? Or do you think that it will be a project or task-based approach to work? And we found a couple of interesting things in doing this brainstorming session. One, we found that overwhelmingly, the sort of trend that we're seeing is a trend towards people having to be much more independent and entrepreneurial about finding work, about identifying things they want to do, about finding out sort of how to get the skills and things that they need in order to be successful in doing the work that they identify, and sort of finding new opportunities to advance in that chosen thing. And that sort of gets to this question that we've talked a little bit about today, that we're done with the one and done model. You can't go to high school or college and expect to do what you learn there for the rest of your life for a 40-year career going forward. It just doesn't work that way anymore. And so across the board, we, in looking at a variety of different future planning scenarios, the two common themes were, one, you have to be much more independent about finding work, and two, you have to be able to sort of retool all the time and go different directions. But the interesting thing about that is that across the 45 or 50 different scenarios that people brainstormed in small groups and that we sort of aggregated down to 4 potential futures, the number one thing that the scenarios all had in common with one another is that people who are working today, the number one thing that they identify that they want in a job is stability. And that is a major juxtaposition with this trend that we're moving towards. We're moving towards independence and having to figure out something for yourself. But what people say they want is to be paid on the 1st and 15th of every month. They want to know how they can forward plan. They want to know that they'll be able to have economic and sort of intellectual security, that they'll have something that can drive them forward going forward. And so my question in structuring our discussion tonight is, what are the actual mechanisms and processes that we can use to provide stability for people in a world where work is much more independently driven? How do you empower people to do that kind of independent finding of work when they want to be able to forward plan? So I guess I'm the first one to end a little bit early.
Yeah, you blew the time out. Congratulations. So Tim had mentioned policy issues, and we mentioned Kristen's connection to Mark Warner. So Donnie Fowler has done a tremendous job with Tech for America, bringing together a range of stakeholders in the policy arena, and actually has had a number of events quite recently. And so please talk a little about some of the insights from those.
Yeah, my name is Donnie Fowler. I haven't had an office that I go to every day since 2008. And in 2008, that was something that you didn't tell anybody. It was sort of like going to Burning Man 15 years ago. You said, no, I'm going camping in the mountains. Whereas now it's a cliche, right? It's a cliche, especially around here, to say, I don't have an office. Or because it seems like many people around here do not work day to day in an office the way our parents did. On the other hand, when I was growing up, I cut grass for a living. I did the 6 yards around my neighborhood, and I wasn't under anybody's contract. It wasn't a full-time job, and it was off the books work. I never paid taxes on my $20 gigs. But at the same time, there were often men that would come through our neighborhood in South Carolina, and they would say, hey, can I rake your yard in the fall? Or hey, can I clean your gutters? Or hey, can I wash your windows? And so this notion, I think, that we are in many ways in a new economy called the gig economy, I don't know that that's true. There's always been part-time work. There have always been part-time workers. I think, Tim, you've actually explained something to me that I've been struggling with, which is, what's the difference between what we're talking about tonight and that fella that used to come to my house in South Carolina and offer to clean out the gutters? And maybe it's the platform. It seems like that's such a simple answer. Maybe it is Occam's razor. Maybe it is that simple. But a fellow I've been working with who's an author and a former journalist at TechCrunch, Greg Ferenstein, and I had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about numbers. And let me read you the numbers that are really confusing me. Who's in this economy? There's some numbers that say 1% to 2% of the workforce and no more is in the gig economy. Now, there's another number that says, let me look at my notes here, that 15% of the economy is contingent workers. And then April stood up and said 35% of the economy today are independent workers. And Greg, who I just mentioned, cited a study from some academics who said 100% of the new jobs in the last decade, 100% are independent jobs. Every new job in the last 8 or 10 years has been an independent job. So I am really confused. Is it 1% or is it 100%? What are we really talking about? Tech for America is, which I've been leading for about a year and a half, is really a bridge between what we have out here and elected officials and some public officials. It's a public service C3 philanthropy. It's not the only thing I do, but it's one thing I'm very happy to be working on. And our job is to talk to those mayors or governors or other public leaders, military official, cabinet secretary, who says, hey, I want to get some of what they got in Silicon Valley. I want to get some of that. But, you know, if you're a new governor, if you're a mayor's policy director in Omaha or the new governor of South Carolina, I want to go get some of what they have in Silicon Valley. Where do you start? And so Tech for America is really trying to be that bridge. We're not a lobbying group. We're not a policy think tank group. We're just a bridge. One of the things that we have been doing for the last year, especially this year though, is connecting where we think you can actually get something done these days. Peter said to talk about politics, so here we go. Whether Hillary had won or the fact that Donald Trump is in the White House, it's almost impossible to get anything done in Washington. While we need some major policy changes in Washington, the definition of independent contractors, for example. Kristen knows more about this than I do. The definition of full-time employees. We can wish that we could write policy papers and do draft legislation and get the Democrats and Republicans who listen to us to talk about this, but really, where are we going to get anything done? And so my question to this group is, through Tech for America, where we're bringing mayors and governors now and sort of ignoring Washington, is where can we find places to pilot some of these ideas that all the smart people in this room have conceived? And just to give you an idea, there's a group of mayors through the National League of Cities that will be here next month. And their question, among others, is, what does my city look like in 5 years or 10 years? What do I have to plan for? I had the mayor of my hometown, Steve Benjamin, say, I just spent $5 million on parking, new parking garages and new parking spaces in Columbia. Was that stupid? Literally, that's the mayor. He's going to be the head of the U.S. conference in a year or two. Did I just spend my $5 million? Was this just a waste of money? I mean, are all my people going to be working from home? Is work changed entirely? These are basic fundamental questions that these public officials have. And so the question I have is simply, what can we ask these governors, innovative governors and mayors, county executives, what can we ask them to test, to pilot?
So just to answer the questions really briefly, 1% to 2% is a statistic from a survey that was done of the percentage of the working population that has actually worked on a gig platform like a Lyft or an Uber in 2016. 15% is the classification by the Department of Labor of the number of workers that are either full or part-time but temporary, that is, are not full-time workers, from 2016. And 35 is the percentage of people who said that they got at least part of their income from independent work. So they might still also have a full-time job, but they are also classify themselves as independent workers. That was the question they were asked. So in each one of the cohorts, obviously, we have to have somebody who knows something about AI. And also, one of the things that is important for us to be thinking about is not just the impact of technology on workers, but what are the ways that it becomes assistive? That is not just AI is here to just eat every task that humans perform, but what are the ways that it can actually enhance and help to make better decisions in the work environment and to help workers? So, Jerry?
Thank you. So my name is Jerry Barrison. I work for IBM, and subconsciously I decided to wear blue today because that happens a lot. I just realized that while I was sitting here. I'm like, wow, I didn't wear, oh yes I did. So I work for IBM Talent Management Solutions, which is where Watson Talent sits. And my main product that I work on is something that I'm sure many of you have used at one point in your life, which is Brass Ring. So I work for ATSs, I work on CRM, I work on onboard, I work on employee survey, I work on all of the things that help us with our current employees. One of the things that we're obviously working on right now is Watson Talent. And just to kind of piggyback on what you said, I don't think of AI as taking over, or we think of it as a cognitive solution to enhance decision making. We're certainly not taking the human out of human resources, as we say, because it's really all about data-driven decisions. And one of the decisions that our clients need to start making is, how do they manage an independent workforce? That first slide that you showed earlier with the top 5 companies and the top 10 companies, and those are my clients. And they all also have to start thinking about, how do they work with independent workers? Independent work is actually a very personal thing to me. I worked in staffing when I started my career. And ultimately, I've seen a lot of my neighbors and friends really move out of corporate America, start their own businesses, freelance, and do all of those things that, as an IBMer, I am not going to be doing if anybody asks my boss who sent me here. But they have a lot of concerns. And it's something that I struggled with for a long time, that fear of, how do I get health care? How do I pay my bills? How do I pay my mortgage? And, they struggle with that still every day. And I think that's the type of policy that we're looking for. How do we ensure that somebody can leave a job, start a new business, and feel secure that they'll be able to live their life? My baby, right now, my dog, is with my neighbor, and she quit her job in consulting in corporate America to start a dog walking business. And 2 months into her new business, she fell at the dog park and broke her wrist, which meant she could not walk any dogs because she only had one hand. So what do? She didn't have any short-term disability. She couldn't get short-term disability now that she already broke her wrist. And those are the fears that I saw in her. And those are the things that, as an IBMer and as I want to help my clients, I want to help them understand how they can hire people in an independent workforce and how they can create project-based job descriptions and how they can really push the job market into a completely different direction. We have a summit actually ongoing right now in London. And one of the things that was said this morning, actually, my coworker slacked me, was that by 2020, they anticipate that they need to create a completely new way of hiring people, and it will all be based on independent workers. This is in EMEA. So it is a little bit of a different mindset, a different way of hiring. It is contract-based in the first place, so it's a little different. But that's where they're headed. They don't want to even talk about job descriptions. They want to talk about project descriptions. And that's one of the things that ultimately things like Watson and AI are going to be able to assist with, because we'll be able to analyze those job descriptions and those project descriptions and help to find the right skills and place the right people into those types of projects. And we don't know if maybe these giant companies are going to hire full-time employees to move around to different projects. We don't know that yet. I think that we're still exploring that. But one of the things that really resonated with me is that we've got 3 years to figure it out, and to figure out a new way to hire. One of the things that I've been so focused on the last 3 years is the consumerization of the candidate. This is a consumer-driven economy. We need to think about candidates as consumers, because they're not just people that you're hiring, they're people that are using your products. And there are people that are going to be on social media and talking. Every bad experience that a candidate has resonates to hundreds of people if they want to. So how do we create that same type of consumer-driven candidate economy with an independent worker to make it more of a commodity?
That's a great question. So, all right. So, I want to open up to questions from the floor here. I'll tell you, I want to start off with one. So, Tim, you talked about platforms. What is so far seems to be likely, given the dynamics of a lot of existing two-sided work platforms nowadays, two-sided markets, is that ultimately they have the strong potential to lead to wage compression, because basically the platform owner is going to make their money, but employers have the capability to continually say, I want to pay less and less and less for that work. So the platforms giveth, but they can also taketh away in that type of context. So is that a risk you think that you're worried about?
Absolutely. I think there's a couple of things that we need to think about systemically. And come to mind a conversation I had with Uber's chief economist once. We were talking about $15 minimum wage, and he said that would actually force us to raise our prices. And he said, but that's good, because basically they're kind of looking for market equilibrium. And if there are higher wages all around, then they have to pay more. But if there are lower wages, then they're going to basically be able to get the workers they need at a lower price. And so in some sense, and this is where we really need to hear more from Carmen in the back, there is a question around here of how do workers get more power? The strongest way that workers get power is through scarcity, right? The second strongest way is through organizing.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff about, well, it's skills. Skills is one way of getting scarcity.
Right.
And I think there are other ways. And I think when I think about policy interventions, I think about how we handled past economic transitions was we took people out of the workforce. Guess what? We used to send little children into factories, and then we sent them to school. That is, we took them out of the workforce. We used to send, high school age students into the workforce. Then we sent them to school. Then we sent college students. So education is two things. It's educating people, and it's taking them out of the workforce. Parental leave is taking people out of the workforce. And there's a lot of interesting hacks. Prison actually is exactly.
Don't forget it.
Yeah, it's a really important one that's how it's being used. And we need to become conscious of these things so that we can actually start to say, oh, if that's what we're doing, is that really the best way to do it? Or is there a different way to do it? But anyway, there's a lot of things that we need to do to basically raise the value of workers and change the power dynamics between people and companies.
Yeah, I don't think we're talking about imprisonment as a positive strategy for the workforce. So it's not exactly no. It's and yeah, we've got over 1 million people that are out of the workforce.
Hi, everyone. Mike from Flex Jobs. My head is spinning a little bit with all the thoughts that's running around my head. I've heard a lot of different themes tonight about this being a shift into a new era. We saw a lot of the pivotal moments that we saw on screen about these new eras that we've all thought about in history. I guess my question is, are we looking at a shift where we can paint a picture of what the next, after we get through that transition, what the next 100 years is going to be after that? Or are we talking about a perpetual change? And are we trying to ferry this next group of workers and companies through the next 20 years, which is the transition, into a perpetual change and shifting? And if you can tell by my beard, I'm a tree hugger at heart. When I think about just natural environments, the organisms that survive in a constant biodiverse area where we're getting in constant change are the ones that are the most diverse. So we're talking about a workforce that is the most resilient. It has the most adversity to environmental changes, big changes. How do we prepare that workforce for an era in constant shift?
That's great. I'm going to ask Kristen to maybe take that.
It's a great question, and I think that that's when we've touched a little bit today on the question of narratives. I think that's in part what people were getting at, that we don't have a clear description of what that future looks like right now. There are sort of a number of possible futures that are vying. There's sort of a human-based organic product things and services, human-to-human interaction-based future, a portfolio or project-based future, a super sci-fi future, a maybe corporate-driven or a corporate philanthropy and responsibility for different places possibility, but we don't have names for the jobs or the way of working that go with those things very well, and so I think the specific answer to your question is that some number of those futures will all be in effect at the same time in different segments of society or industries, and that the shift that we're seeing and that we're moving to is a shift to this perpetual sense of new things emerging all the time, and that part of what automation and AI are driving is this sort of constant retooling and sense of people will do things differently going forward. Others, Donnie here.
I want to add something that we're thinking about as we talk to these public elected leaders around the country. It seems that there are two basic problems. One is wages, and the other is benefits. And the public policy goal should be increasing wages. And the public policy goal should be making benefits less expensive, whether it's less expensive to the worker or less expensive to the employer, or whatever Uber and Lyft call themselves, employers or not. So the question is, how do we develop outside of we're trying to describe a car right now to somebody who's only seen a horse and buggy. And we may not even have the right language for that. But if we think about the goals from the worker's point of view as increasing wages, making benefits more available like retirement, health care, unemployment insurance, disability, making benefits more available, but making them cheaper for both the worker and the employer, that might be a wages and benefit framework.
Yeah. So I would argue it's a healthy discussion about whether it's actually you need to increase wages and benefits or whether you're actually just talking about an overall lifestyle that people want and the other ways to achieve that aren't just necessarily manipulating those particular income issues.
So I get to talk.
Please, Mark.
I spent 5 years trying to solve this problem, and there's a couple of things that hasn't been discussed tonight. One is, what is a job? It seems really obvious, but government still doesn't quite believe that anything less than 40 hours a week is a job. And for our industry, that there are actually jobs other than programmers, right? So basically all the focus and all the discussion and everything's about getting these geeky people, of which 1% will become programmers. The reality is that most of the future jobs are not programmer jobs, and there's a lot of them, okay? The other thing that the industry does is this focus on youth. And there's nothing wrong with youth, but moms coming back from having their kids, vets returning, baby boomers, there's lots of other kind of people who also need these jobs. And so our industry usually gets that wrong. Okay. Now, I just recently attended some what is AI going to do for jobs thing, and they're going to give advice to Trump and all this kind of shit. And for me, it's about the new jobs we create. I'm a software guy. I create software that creates jobs, and especially creativity tools that allow people to create and express themselves. This is where the new jobs are. Writing. Right?
Mark, we're going to ask you to keep it fairly tight. So
Oh, I'm sorry.
I want to get a couple other
let's
questions.
create jobs. That's what I'm saying. Just create
agree.
jobs. There you go.
Absolutely.
Solve the problem.
Amen, brother. Amen.
So I have a question that I think touches on a lot of the topics we've been discussing, which is what are the ways that we can help people navigate this turbulence by actually finding their way to the opportunities that are rapidly emerging, and not only see where those opportunities are, but understand the paths to being qualified to take advantage of them. My dad told me, your job, whatever you have later in life, post-college, probably hasn't been invented yet. That was definitely true, but it seems to be more and more true, and particularly true for the people we're talking about. And so beyond there just being platforms where you can go sign up to be an Uber driver, how do we help people see where the future is taking us? And to the earlier point about retraining having been kind of laughable to this point, what are the supports we can give them to help them actually take advantage of those opportunities?
Could you identify?
I'm Noah Flower. I work at Salesforce, where we are rapidly automating as much as possible in partnership with IBM.
One thing I would inject into the discussion is that we have to stop talking about jobs and we have to start talking about work and workers. Because a job is like something you get from someone else. Work is something that anyone can look around and say, oh my God, that needs doing. And I think if we change the framing of the question, we would be asking, why aren't we doing in our economy the things that need doing? Right. I think the language is a map, and the language we use about this problem really shapes how we think about it. So that would be the first thing I would try to tackle.
Yeah, I'd agree. And so let me just jump in real quickly. I wrote a piece on Medium called Unbundling Work. Look, work is 4 things. It's our skills applied to tasks, to solve problems, and generate results. That's work. A job has a bunch of other things, but work is really skills applied to tasks, tasks to solve problems, and generate results. And so what happens is, Tim is right, we have to stop talking about a job and instead say, well, what are the problems to be solved? And what are the results to be generated? Now, what happens is Silicon Valley so far has pointed a lot of its attention to what are the tasks we can automate? That is, how can we replace the skills of individuals at lower cost to solve problems and generate results? But as workers, we have the same opportunity now to try to find new problems, as Tim was saying, and to generate new results, and not to find ourselves completely obviated by the automation that is going to take those tasks. So we need to break down, we need to unbundle this construct of a job, and instead, as Tim said, to talk about work.
One of the first things that that Artie, who I think many of you in the room might know, said to me when she came on as our VP of Offering Management was, "What gets you up in the morning?" And or what are you doing? And I don't think it matters if you're an independent worker or if you're a corporate crazy person like myself. You have to know what gets you up in the morning, and that doesn't, maybe it is driving an Uber, and maybe it is, walking dogs. For me, I'm running a business. Ultimately, I'm not building a product. I'm running a business. I'm making sure that this business is successful. And I think if people think about what gets them up in the morning instead of the job that they're doing, I think that would create a different way of thinking about work. If I talk about my tasks, that's something completely different. But when we talk about independent workers, I think they're answering that question: what gets them up in the morning? A lot easier than many of us in corporate America.
Right. So yeah, definitely talking about meaning and purpose as the drivers. So,
Two questions,
and then we're gonna need to
and then we're
wrap
gonna
up.
break the next thing. So these two.
Okay, my name is John O'Din. I've worked in distributed companies most of my career, and I've been managing distributed teams for probably 10 years or more. Anyway, and I'm writing a book on this. Mike asked a good question about diversity, as in the ecosystem. I'm from Ireland originally, and as Tim knows, when an entire economy is geared around one food crop, and then that one food crop hits a problem, that's a real problem. We lost potatoes for a while 150 years ago, and we still talk about it. I say that because if you have a city or an area that's geared around one economy, like Detroit was geared around cars, when the cars changed, that whole region got wiped. And we had a problem here in the first .com boom, for those of us who lived through that. Click one. Two, if you wanted to Tim's thing about profit, like actual cash here, if people value shareholder value, then include in the cost of having a human sitting at a desk, include the cost of the desk in one of the most expensive parts of the world as the cost of hiring someone in the Bay Area, and then say, oh, I could hire someone who is a veteran who lives in Kansas and has to stay there because of their home situation, or a parent who lives in Colorado, instead of someone here. So my call to action to everyone here is, could you, instead of saying you're trying to hire the best person for the job, could you be real with yourself and say, I'm trying to hire the best person for the job who is willing to relocate to my office? And if that feels wrong to you, then put remote welcome in your job descriptions. I think just that tomorrow would be a start.
Yeah, I think we need to
Thank
brand
you.
something like rural sourcing in America as a meme.
Hi, my name is Chris, and my company is called the Center for Unintended Consequences of Technology.
Does that mean you're promoting them, or you're trying to mitigate them?
It's the question.
Okay.
Question's based on that. So we basically focus on thinking. We have two arms. One is a think tank and thinking around many unintended consequences. But so what's happening now is because of investments and market caps go geared towards what's coming, what's in the future. What we tend to forget and kind of put on the side or push on the side is the idea of what is technology for? If we think about technology, technology is for people, and technology should be designed around how we have a sustainable future for the world and for the people. So for us, what we are thinking about and what's keeping us up at night is the idea of what's the purpose of life, right? So my question to the panel and everyone else in the room is, how do we continue thinking, forward thinking, but at the same time trying to create solutions that are gearing, that are fitting the market caps and the stock market areas.
Okay. Does anybody want to take that? Make it one. No, okay. Then I'll respond real quickly, and we can move to our next segment. So very, very quickly, a lot of discussion has been about the changing nature of business. Just 2 quick data points. Heidi and I started something called SOCAP, Social Capital Markets, which today gets 3,000 impact entrepreneurs and investors in San Francisco. And though it's been 10 years, we've not seen the sea change in the difference in thinking in people in building businesses with a purpose that I think several panelists, including Paul and Tim and John were saying earlier. But that represents a huge opportunity, is to expand the list of stakeholders that changes the nature of work and changes the calculus for businesses. And what we found through that platform is that you can actually create businesses with a purpose that have a better ability to deliver value to their customers than your competitors, because you have a cost of good baked into what you do. So it means better entrepreneurs, it means smarter business people creating and running those companies. That's just one of the elements, but it's a really, really key one. So on that note, I think we're going to have to transition. We're already over our time. We have to transition to the next segment. So please thank our speakers here, and you get a chance to engage with them in just a second. So thanks, guys.